Hello everyone. My name is Li Jin and I'm a partner at Bird and Bird based in Singapore. Thank you for joining us for our second day of the YSIAC Conference. And this is our first session of today, ArbXTalk. This will be followed by a panel discussion on cryptocurrency, blockchain, and NFTs, and what do they mean for arbitration practitioners. So for our first ArbXTalk session here for the YSIAC Conference in 2021, we are delighted and very privileged to have Mr. Fan Ziyang from the World Economic Forum. He's head of digital trade there. So Ziyang will be sharing his life experiences and life lessons with us during this session. Before we start posing the questions to Ziyang, just a quick run through as to his professional milestones and accomplishments. So Ziyang is qualified in the US and he's familiar with many aspects of legal practice, having clerked for the Honorable Brenda J. Holler of the Superior Court of the Virgin Islands. He's also worked in Beijing with Sherman and Sterling for 4 years, followed by a role as Assistant General Counsel at the US Trade and Development Agency. He's also very familiar with Singapore, having served as Senior Legal Counsel at Airbnb here. So since 2017, Ziyang has been with the World Economic Forum as its head of digital trade based in San Francisco. In addition to that, he's also the adjunct professor at UC Berkeley Goldman School of Public Policy. So already a very busy man, but on top of all of that, he's found time to give back to the community. And he's involved in various causes, including the Washington Humane Society, which focuses on animal welfare. He's also involved with the Asian American Lead, which is a non-profit organization supporting low-income and underserved Asian Pacific American youth through mentoring programs. And of course, he's also a board committee member with the Asian Pacific American Bar Association, which is the oldest and largest association of Asian Pacific American attorneys in the Washington, D.C. area. So thank you very much, Ziyang, for finding the time to share some life lessons with us today. Look, you've had a long and varied career. Would you first be able to share with us an overview of your career and how you transitioned to your current role?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here, Li Jun. It's such a pleasure. When I first received the invitation, I almost declined it because, I thought it's arbitration. I'm not an arbitration lawyer. What would I talk about? But then you explained this ArbX. And I feel like my career actually fits this X quite well because as you mentioned, I have done pretty much, I worked in almost all the sectors a lawyers could. I worked in the public sector. I did a clerkship. I worked in the US government. I worked in the private sector. I worked at a law firm and also in-house at a tech company. And now I'm working, in the in-between space, right? I work at an international organization at the World Economic Forum. And also I teach at UC Berkeley, so academia. So public, private, and private in between space. And to your question, I quite enjoyed my life career journey. I feel that looking back, and I will definitely took on some interesting roles. And if there's any themes, I would say be curious, take calculated risks, and try to make an impact. So no matter I was in public or private or in between, those are kind of the three of my guiding principles, my North Star, so to speak, that led me to my current position.
Thank you. So could you just perhaps, give us a little glimpse into what your usual workday looks like, given that you wear so many hats? I'm sure that, as with a lot of us, we find that we have so many tasks to juggle, so many challenges to meet day to day. What does your usual workday look like and how do you sort of prioritize and run through the list?
Yes, so the World Economic Forum is the international organization for public and private partnership. So what that means is that we work with the public sector and private sector to co-design solutions to improve the state of the world. 4 years ago, so when I joined in 2017, the forum created a center in San Francisco called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the whole idea is that emerging technologies, AI, blockchain. I understand you have a session on blockchain and NFT and crypto coming up, right? The technology is moving too fast for laws and regulations to keep up, and there's a big gap in between, right? And we hear the demands from the public sector, from the governments, from the policymakers. Says, for example, NFT. Okay, what is an NFT? How do we regulate NFT? Tokenization, classification of tokens. Is a payment token? Is a security token? What do we do? All those questions, right, from the public side. And for the private side, there's also a demand to work more with the policymakers or the on those topics, because they realize that the move fast and break things, that kind of like the era is sort of gone, right? That they have to work with the policymakers to make the best laws and policies for the technologies to mature and develop in a healthy way, and to foster innovation. So what we do is that we work with both the public and private sector to come up and co-design the legal and policy framework for that particular technology, for to maximize benefits and then minimize its potential harms. So okay, what's that mean? And give you a concrete example actually in the region. So about 2 years ago, and still ongoing, we worked with in ASEAN on a regional cross-border digital payments project. For folks that live and work in ASEAN, that even though within the country, for example, Singapore, you can send money relatively easy, but when it comes to cross borders, right, that's still, it takes time, costs money, and it could be quite a hassle. Well, the reason is that there's still a lot of policy and regulations that are kind of designed for the pre-digital age. So we need to update those laws and regulations and make it more efficient and also safe for the consumer for cross-border payments. So what we did is that we got a group of companies, think of the typical payment companies, and then we got a group of policymakers, the central banks of several countries in the region, Ministry of Finance of several countries in the region, got them together and say, hey, how should we design the best framework going forward for cross-border digital payments? So we spent many long hours co-design this framework, and then it was published. It's actually publicly available, and then it was presented to the ASEAN Secretariat. And I understand some of those recommendations have been implemented to facilitate the policies in this area. Similarly, we've done things on 3D printing, digital currency, e-signature, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe just to wrap up your question is that I think because of this gap, I think for many of the new technologies, so there either some of the laws and regulation policies are outdated, or it's just the greenfield. There's nothing there, right? So and you have to build something from ground up, and instead of just having this 500-page law, you actually need to start with the principle. Then you build a framework. Then you go think of a pyramid. Then you go down to the very detailed laws and regulations. And as a lawyer, you can work at all three levels. And I think there's just a lot of opportunities.
Thank you. So that sounds really interesting. And I understand that you've been focusing quite a bit on the framework, the regulatory framework, insofar as digital trade and payments are concerned. I think because we have quite a number of arbitration practitioners that's tuning into the webinar, what scope do you see in terms of potential friction, tension, or disputes in this space, which I think very much rests on perhaps the regulatory and the liability framework that you are in the process of putting together?
Absolutely, absolutely. Disclaimer, lawyer disclaimer, I'm not an arbitrator, so and this is just more high level and of what I have been observing from my current position. I think what could be, obviously in the space, antitrust, privacy, data governance are all hot topics. But what I see will be particularly interesting is this intersection of tech and more of the quote unquote the traditional industries. What are the traditional industries? Think of, say, shipping, right? Trade, agriculture, right? Things are kind of like the non-sexy industries that in many ways are still very much, for example, trade and logistics, very paper heavy. If you think, so say, financial industry, fintech, whatnot, has or is being disrupted. You may know a lot of apps, for digital wallets, etc. Name one app that is for digitizing supply chain, right? I mean, there are out there, but I'm just saying that it's not well known, right? And it's still but at the same time, it represents a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs, and in return, could also cause a lot of undefined issues that need to be resolved by, for example, by lawyers. For example, again, this traditional industry, bills of lading, right? This paper document has been in the paper form for decades, literally decades long. Now, there's a trend of electronic bills of lading, right? But how many countries recognize that? Very few, right? So so the legal recognition of that, and then if you take a step further, if you are, again, for the next talk, if you're actually tokenizing the electronic bills of lading, how do you define that? And if there's a dispute along the whole supply chain, some use paper, some countries recognize electronic bill of lading, some don't. Some countries recognize, the tokenization of it, some don't. And so you can see there is just a whole bunch of issues that are undefined that could pop up as traditional industries are being disrupted, are on the path of digitization. Right, the tech is here, whereas the laws and regulations are still here, right? And that gap can cause a lot of potential legal issues that needs everyone's help here.
So what are your views? I mean, there are a number of cases that attempt to grapple with new technologies, technological issues by using the conventional legal principles that might have been around in the common law for 100 or 200 years. So what we're looking at is trying to adapt the traditional principles to fit into this new world or these new products. How much change do you think we need to introduce to the traditional principles, the legal principles, for us to adequately govern this new technology, I think, transformation that's taking place? So I can give one specific example, cryptocurrency. Should it be considered a species of property, which might bring with it, I think, various other legal significance and impact in terms of enforcement, etc. So the question again, I think, to recap, is how much change do you think we need to bring to our laws and traditional legal principles to adequately govern and provide a sufficiently certain legal framework for private parties?
That's a great question and perfectly worded, Li-Jing. That really is the gazillion-dollar question in the tech space, right? For tech law and policy. Let me first by start saying that whether it's laws or regulations or policies, typically there's a process, right? It doesn't happen right away. And I personally think it should be that. You can't just have a law going this direction today and then a law going that direction tomorrow. And to make good, reasonable laws with nuanced approaches, you do need time, right? The makers of those laws and policies need to do research, understand it, and it shouldn't just be a knee-jerk reaction. So either this is great, let's full support of this, or this is really bad, let's ban this, right? And I think your point about crypto, is it a security? Is it a currency, right? Are still being debated, and I think it should be that way. But I think maybe just a general approach, and no perfect answer, but general approach is this idea of called agile governance. The idea is that we need to be more flexible and more agile when it comes to laws and the policy making. There are many ways of doing this. For example, you can anticipate what is going on, and you can use legal policy sandboxes to experiment. Or because it's tech, you have data, right? You can try it out and use the data to track, is this the right approach? And if not, just change it, right? So I think one quick example coming to my mind is that in San Francisco, there's for a while the e-scooters, those electronic scooters. Just one day you woke up and just all over the city, right? And then the city actually pulled it back and started regulating it. But instead of either say yes, scooters everywhere, or no, scooters nowhere, they come up with this very flexible and experimental approach that allowed 2 or 3 companies to roll out their e-scooters in specific locations and tracked it and gather input and surveys and etc. So I think that's a good example of the right way when it comes to technology governance versus say when in the early days say of Uber, Airbnb, some cities just either shut down the entire thing in a very a black and white approach. I think this very nuanced approach, this flexible nuanced approach is very necessary as we're going forward.
Thank you. So I like what you've just mentioned, agile government, in terms of dealing with I think one of the biggest forces that we see today, which is technology. The other one which I wanted to discuss also, I think one of the other points that have been making headlines in the past year and relates to the community. There's been quite a number of incidents in the US and perhaps in elsewhere involving Asian Americans. And we've just, we've talked about or we've introduced your work with Asian American Lead and other programs. Could you share with us your thoughts and perhaps also some thoughts in terms of diversity in the workplace and how you think, diversity and perhaps the correct approach towards these things actually lead to general improvement, not just in the workplace, but generally for the society at large?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an issue that's close and dear to my heart. I recently wrote an article about this because I had a baby son that was born earlier this year, this springtime. And I just look at him and look at all the horrible news and incidences that are happening all around the US and actually all around the world, right? I think, folks of Asian descent are just being attacked for absolutely no reason on the streets of, New York, San Francisco, London, etc. So I think for our community, one, we need to raise awareness. For too long, there's just this the stereotype of Asians being quiet, of being weak, being the perpetual foreigners and don't speak out. So I think the first thing is that the Asian American, Asian Canadian, one of the Asian community needs to speak out. Let this be known, right? And then two, after you raise awareness, we need to come up with the solutions and drive for changes. Whether it's legislative, whether it's that, protesting, or whether within the workplace, right? Ask your superior or ask your company senior management, address this issue, right? Just say, hey, this is the issue, or it doesn't, for example, in different regions, if there's any discriminatory, issues or challenges, raise it up. Like, don't just go along with it. And I think that's most important takeaway, I think, from the past year. I think it's extremely important. And then, I've been to lived in Singapore, as you know. So I think in Singapore, maybe different types of challenges as well because of the racial makeup, right? So whether you are in the quote unquote majority or in the minority, it doesn't being majority in one country, in another country you are the minority, right? So the rights of those, each of the groups should be the same no matter where you are. So I think and if you're in minority, fight for it. If you're the majority, look out for the minority population, see what you can help them to achieve.
It's interesting that you raised a point about there being majority and minority groups within a society, and that might vary depending on its constitution. Do you feel that those in the majority groups would have slightly different responsibilities from those in the minority group? I think it's been well documented that perhaps I think those who might be in a slightly more privileged position, sometimes it's not a sort of a deliberate lack of action. It might be lack of awareness. What sort of actions do you think individuals within the minority or the majority group can take to create, I think, a more equal opportunity society?
Absolutely, that's such a great question, Li. I would say dialogue. Right? If we had to try to understand the perspective and experiences from the other groups, and of course, if you have an opportunity when you travel, you'll realize, oh, I am in a minority when I cross the border, when the airplane lands. Of course, when it's safe to do so. So I think this this exposure to the more diverse world definitely helps. And short of that, have the conversation with the folks around you at work or in your neighborhood. As I said, over here I'm a minority. In Singapore, I'm actually in the majority position, right? So I think just having the different perspectives is extremely helpful to I think empathy is really the key. Empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the other point is I think in terms of the policies, quite a number of organizations have very formal policies around these and very supportive statements that are made. The data sometimes, I think, suggests that there's some way to go. Do you think it's a question of the rate of adoption in terms of execution of these policies, or are there other forces which requires us, I suppose, to take a little more time in terms of hitting, I think, the ideal metrics or the targets or the kind of percentage or proportional representation that adequately reflects the general population makeup?
Yeah, I think it's just, I think in many cases, people have good intentions. Right? People do want to promote equity, fairness, and it's just that, the institutional makeup or the culture of a particular company or organization is not just there yet. But I think what we have seen the past couple of years is this general awakening of those issues worldwide. Right, and not just in the U.S. Definitely, U.S. plays a very important part, but it has ripple effects all over the world. And I follow some Instagram accounts about Singapore online, so I have some awareness to it. But I think as folks, especially the younger generation, become more aware of those issues and be more willing to speak up about those issues, I think I try and hope to be optimistic about this the overall trend.
I share your optimism. I think it's great. Now, just sort of going to a slightly new topic. You've worked in many different countries. You've worked in the US. You've worked in China. You've worked in Singapore. Could you share with the rest of us, who might not have had the opportunity to work in so many different cities? Do you perceive any differences in work culture across the different cities, different countries? And how do you help yourself adapt to the different expectations on the ground?
Absolutely, and I would add that I worked in the Caribbean. USVI is part of the United States, but it's also in the Caribbean. It's right next to Puerto Rico and British Virgin Islands. It's very different culture and there. So another great question. I would say that yes, I do feel very grateful and privileged to have had the opportunity to work in different places. But just looking back on that, I would say yes, of course, there are different culture, different way of doing things, different languages, and et cetera. But I think at the core, if you're in a position, respect the local culture and the way of doing things, and then try to learn something about the local culture, right? Don't just see yourself as quote unquote an expat, whatever that term means in these days, right? Is that don't see yourself, even if you're the outsider, try to learn something about the local culture and why they do things that way, right? Don't jump into automatic conclusions. Just give you one example. When I was in Singapore, I live in Tanjung Pagar, right? And one day I got curious. I'm like, what does Tanjung Pagar mean actually? So I actually asked a lot of my friends in Singapore, expats. Actually, none of them knew what Tanjung Pagar means. So I'm like, you're living Tanjung Pagar for 10 years now. How can you not know what it means? So I looked it up. I Googled it. So Tanjung Pagar means Cape of Stakes. Stakes like basically fishing traps. So Cape, so basically Tanjung Pagar, the area was a fishing, was Malay first of all, and then it was a fishing village. And that's why it's called the Cape of Stakes, like Cape of like fishing traps and fishing village. So that's the culture and the tradition of how, of course, there's a huge difference of what Tanjung Pagar is now. But I think that's just a small thing, when I later talk to folks, especially the folks who speak Malay, they're like, yeah, this is what it means. So I think it just and they got really happy because I actually, went in and spent literally 3 minutes to look it up on Wikipedia, right? So I think that's just a small thing. And I did the same in the Caribbean, or when I was working in China. And just to show that, you are willing. They don't expect you to, either speak language or know everything about the culture, but to show that you're willing, I think that's a huge step. And also make you feel more, I'll say, involved and give you a sense of belonging if you do that.
That's amazing. And I have to say, I'm quite embarrassed to know that I've lived in Singapore for almost all my life. I don't know what Tanjung Pagar means or its history behind it. So thank you for sharing. Although I have to say that, I've lived in Bukit Timah for more than half my life. I still don't know what it means. And I'm going to look it up right after this.
I think it's something about the hill. I think it's something about the hill.
Yeah, something to do with the hill. Look, so I think having worked in so many different roles and cities, could you share perhaps your most memorable work experience?
Yeah, that's thank you for that. Since at the forum, Davos, we meet a lot of head of states or celebrities. Once I was in a room with Al Gore and will.i.am, who's a singer of Black Eyed Peas. That was such a surreal experience. However, I would say those are fun, but I would say my most memorable experience is when I feel like my work made an impact. So a couple of years ago, I traveled to South Africa, to Cape Town for leisure. And several years before that, I did a project of providing free Wi-Fi to basically underprivileged neighborhood outside of Cape Town. I worked with a company. I was a lawyer, actually. I drafted agreement, drafted contract, the legal, the tech agreement to set up this like free Wi-Fi service for this underprivileged neighborhoods. So the idea is that kids and local residents will congregate at the square and get online and learn more skills and do more e-commerce or learning, etc., etc. So when I was at Cape Town, I've decided to actually take a trip to that shantytown to take a look. And it just happened that, so Airbnb had this thing called experiences. So basically they can take you do stuff like cooking classes and whatnot. And two young men from that neighborhood actually put up this Airbnb experience where they would take you to kind of jogging, and basically do a quick jog around the neighborhood and try to show you that what it's like. So the neighborhood is so dangerous, and I'm not making this up. When I tried to get an Uber driver to get me there, the first Uber driver flat out refused to. And it was at 8 a.m. in the morning, so it's not at night, because he's like, I don't want to get carjacked there. And the second one, finally, I convinced him to take me there, but he actually stayed until I met with the two young men because he was so afraid I would get robbed or whatnot. So long story short, the two young men took me jogging and we stopped at the town square, and I saw the Wi-Fi that that I played a small part in getting there, and I saw the kids that are sitting there using their phone, and the city built a small computer lab near there, leveraging the Wi-Fi, and the fact that those two young men were able to use the free internet there to get on Airbnb, right, to show their neighborhood and to make a living, to better their lives instead of some of the more negative options that they're so prevalent in their neighborhood. And now they're talking about that because of that, they brought in so many guests, like me, and they're actually fundraising to build a new school in that neighborhood. So all that will just really, really warmed my heart, and that's why I feel like my work made an impact, even though it was 5 or 6 years ago that when the project first started. But just by being there and to see all the kids and see the two young men, just their biggest smile and their dreams for the future. Yeah, I'll say that was my most memorable moment.
Wow, that's a wonderful story. I mean, so it's about technology and the access to technology in remote and underdeveloped areas and how it can improve lives. And also, I think, try to create more opportunities, as we've been talking about for the past 20 minutes or so. So I think it really warms your heart to know that your work is making such a huge contribution. Now, I just need to ask, because you mentioned Al Gore and will.i.am earlier, any celebrity stories that you could share a little with us?
There's we try to not share too much, but I'll just say that will.i.am, he's actually we know him as the singer of Black P, but he's actually a technologist as well. He's an advocate for fair use of AI. So you can Google him and look him up. He's actually participating at the World Economic Forum's AI Council. And he has been in some of those meetings, and he has some really good points of how to use AI in a fair and equitable way, and especially how the underprivileged communities can either benefit or suffer from the misuse of some of that, which for some of the technologists, because it's an issue they don't come across their mind, because they may not be part of the never had that kind of personal experience. So he has been a major advocate for the tech for good when it comes to some of those technologies. Amazing. So.
Well, thanks. That's another discovery that you've shared with us. Well, at least I've learned for the first time today, aside from what Tanjung Pagar means, that will.i.am is also a keen technologist, perhaps a little less known than the Black Eyed Peas discography, but still good to know anyway that so many individuals are, I think, on top of this very current and relevant topic and have strong views about it. Now, I think perhaps one other thing I'd like to discuss with you is COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the workplace. I think quite a number of us are grappling with the challenges, work from home, etc. So my question to you is, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do?
Yeah, I think you folks in Singapore had a lot more, I'll say, definitely luckier. I feel like when I talk to my Singaporean friends, because my understanding, the restaurants, there are different rules, circuit breakers, etc. But mostly, the restaurants, offices were open, right? Many of the U.S. cities are still shut down, right? So I haven't been to my office for I guess over a year until last month. It was my first time went in since the pandemic started last year. So definitely there are ups and downs. And I think a lot of us experience, I'm sure folks in Singapore feel that in other regions as well. For me, to answer your question, I found meditation quite helpful. I think it's something I picked up before the pandemic, but I definitely have practicing it more and more. I have both. I have 2 meditation apps on my phone, which is kind of ironic because you need an electronic device to help you meditate. But that's that's the world we're living right now. Yeah, so I try to meditate, and I try to also remind myself that put things into perspective. Right? That be grateful for what we have, the health and family and our work. So I think it was. Stephen Hawking who used to say, remember to look at the stars and not down at your feet. I think, that's something we need to remember, especially as lawyers, right? Sometimes I feel like, as lawyers, sometimes I think we're just, doing God's work. It's so important, but at the same time, take a step back, right? And be grateful for what we have and put things into perspective.
Do you deliberately set aside certain time of the day for meditation, or is it sort of on a as-needs basis? And I mean, I know you mentioned earlier you have a newborn. Congratulations, by the way. It must be quite challenging to try to juggle that part of your life together with the ongoing, work responsibilities.
I do. I do both, actually. I do try to set out some time, usually in around like mid-afternoons, around 2, 3 o'clock. I found out that's when you feel either tired or burnt out, and sneaking, and also less phone calls at that time, right? Sneaking 5, 10 minutes of meditation, I found that helpful. Or, even an emergency, quote unquote, 1-minute meditation. Something I do is that you really close eyes, you take, what I do, you take 12 deep breaths in and out. That's roughly about a minute. So it doesn't take much time, but it helps.
Thank you. So I think just for the final question, do you have any other reflections, final or parting insights for participants in terms of whether it be sort of personal ones or those in the professional space?
Yeah, it's really about personal reflections. I'm not here to give advice or anything. Everyone has their own lives, and just looking back, and actually because of this invitation, it got me to look back at my career and really sit down and comb through some of the themes. As I mentioned earlier, right? I think 3 themes for me is 1, be curious. I consider myself introverted adventurer. I don't jump off planes or bungee jump, but I am open to a lot of opportunities and challenges. I'm curious of what's out there, right? That's 1. Again, I'm not saying you have to move, and I was privileged that I had the opportunity, but you don't have to, right? And 2, take calculated risks. As lawyers, generally speaking, right? We're risk averse, but I think by open yourself up to more opportunity, and either way, they're taking calculated risk with your career, or moving to another city, or for example, with me, moving from public to private, and back to public, and back to private, and etc. It's doable. It's challenging, but it's definitely doable. Of course, if you have good reasons to do it. You don't, as I said, you don't have to move, you don't have to change career, right? But there are still within your life or career, you can take on more interesting things. For example, if you're a lawyer at a law firm, take some pro bono work, right? I think, talking about impact, remember the first pro bono case was a law firm when we helped this Nepalese refugee to get asylum status in Hong Kong. So she's a mom and her kids can stay, right? And felt just extremely satisfying doing that. So I think, be open to opportunities. And lastly, try to make an impact, whatever your definition of impact is. I think, just that at the end of the day, that when you look back, you say, I lived an interesting and fulfilled professional and personal life. And that's all we want, right? I mean, it's always hard to do, but if you looking back, says, what, mostly I've done that. I think that's just a quite satisfying feeling.
Thank you, Ziyang, for sharing. It's been really lovely listening to you. Thank you again for taking up the invitation. And I suppose we would be putting up if you don't mind, your LinkedIn profile. So if any of our participants have any questions, I think they can just drop you a message. Again, thank you very much.
Absolutely, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love this conversation. Thank you, Li Jing, and folks at this event.